Welcome back to every naval battle in history. This is a very exciting episode, folks. One of the most important naval conflicts in history is starting right here. Described by Polybius as the longest and most severely contested war in history. We are diving into the Punic Wars. For the hardy band of regular subscribers who watches each new episode drops every week, a quick apology. We're going to have to do some remedial ancient naval warfare history this episode, as it's going to be the start of its own playlist as well. For new viewers, welcome. Don't be daunted, this is a fine place to start. As the regulars will know, in 2060 BCE, the wars of the Diadochi are still raging in the eastern Mediterranean, as Alexander the Great's successors smash 7 shades of crap out of each other on land and sea. So fixated are they on each other that they barely notice as something kicks off on the island of Sicily between the Roman Republic and the Empire of Carthage. It's important to remember we are dealing with Republican Rome, not the later imperial phase. Don't go mistaking them for some shining democracy, however. The qualification to be a senator in ancient Rome was being the modern equivalent of a billionaire. Imagine the billionaires of your country meeting to decide the fate of your nation. Probably not as far off from your current reality as you'd like, but at least we pretend our votes as citizens matter. Rome is reasonably well known. Carthage less so, in large part because the Romans obliterated every trace of them that they could, and then made no effort to preserve any records left over, which was a common story when any civilization bar the Greeks came into contact with Romans. We're mostly reliant on the writings of Polybius to know what happened, a Greek by birth but Roman-leaning and very much in the orbit of the Scipio family, of whom we will hear much, much more. Polybius was present at the end of the 3 wars for the sack of Carthage, but given the Punic Wars as a whole ran from 264 BCE to 146, that still makes the early days long distant from Polybius's time. Modern historical analysis and archaeology show he's pretty reliable, but we do need to remember the story is told almost entirely from the Roman perspective. What was Carthage itself? The name literally meant new city, the old city being Tyre in modern-day Lebanon, and it's further confused by the foundation of a new Carthage, a new city. Our alphabet comes from those long-ago Phoenician people of the Levant. From Tyre and Sidon, the Phoenicians settled the African shore of the Mediterranean, building ports and forts in a string separated by a day's rowing from each other, offering water and safety at night as these prolific traders built wildly profitable trade routes. Carthage, near modern-day Tunis, was the greatest of these ports-turned-cities. When we look at maps of the empire, we need to remember this was a thalassocracy, and that land was held to maintain a port and access to and control of the sea lanes, and not for its own sake. A very different perspective to the Romans, which was a society built around land. At its height before the Punic Wars, Carthage was probably the biggest city in the world. A cosmopolitan, bustling metropolis of traders and artisans where anyone could rise to the greatest heights if they could hustle and make the coin. When we talk about warships in this conflict, we are almost always referring to quinqueremes. Long, low, oar-driven ships powering great bronze rams, 90 oars down each side arranged in 30 files. Each file would be made up of 5 men on each side, hence quin for 5, powering 3 oars. The exact configuration remains unknown and much argued about, but that's the gist of it. So probably 2 men on 2 oars and 1 man on 1 oar for 5 men powering 3 oars. With 300 rowers, 20 making up the deck crew, 100 or so armed soldiers, they had a total wartime crew of around 420 men each, and weighed around 100 tons. In the east, the Greeks were building much larger ships, but Carthage preferred speed and maneuverability to drive their rams, and the Romans followed suit. And it's worth noting rowers were not slaves, despite what you've seen in the movies. They were highly skilled, prized, and paid. In Roman service, noting they built over 1,000 of these ships in the course of the First Punic War, they extended the same rights and privileges to sailors as to legionaries, but with a crucial difference that sailors didn't have to pay for their own weapons and armour as soldiers did. It created the opportunity for social mobility, albeit at risk of shipwreck. There is a story that the Romans found a shipwrecked Carthaginian quinquereme and carefully replicated it. Certainly early in the wars, the Romans did not enjoy fighting the experienced mariners of Carthage, who moved fast and manoeuvred to deliver fatal strikes with their rams. The Roman answer to this was to build the corvus, or crow, a heavy boarding ramp on the bows of their ships with a mighty metal spike which drove into their enemies to enable boarding action. The Romans used the corvus to turn naval battles where they were at a disadvantage into something like a land battle which was more to their liking. The weight of the corvus did nothing good for the seaworthiness of the ships, however, and it appears to have disappeared from use quite quickly as the Romans gained confidence at sea. The irony is that by the time Hannibal was running wild in the Second Punic War, the Romans were masters at sea and the Carthaginians had the Romans on the run at land. Now, it's important to note that relations between the Roman Republic and Carthage had been quite good historically. They'd both seen Greek expansionism in the Western Mediterranean as the real threat, in particular the blossoming of Magna Graecia. But with the mass transfer of Greek populations from the Mediterranean to seek their fortunes in the vast empires Alexander had conquered, Magna Graecia had collapsed, and power vacuums are dangerous things. Having long contested with the Greeks for control of Sicily, the Carthaginians considered it to be their property, while they were okay with Syracuse as the last remaining Greek rump in the region. The Romans, on the other hand, having made southern Italy their own, literally looked across the Strait of Messina and saw what looked like their island to them. When I say literally, here's the view from the city of Reggio today, and we can see Messina through a Google Street View camera. It's hard not to have some sympathy for the view that the Romans had a better claim than the North Africans. One last thing before we get started, pretty much every Carthaginian in this story is going to be called Hanno, Hannibal, or Mago. This is probably more to do with the Romans having a limited understanding of their opponents than a lack of names in Carthage's society. We do know that in 265 BCE, the folk of Messana, modern-day Messina, called on both Romans and Carthaginians to help them against the depredations of Syracuse. Up until this point, Rome and Carthage had managed their affairs quite well, and been helpful to each other in stomping the Greeks out of the neighbourhood. A Carthaginian leader called Hanno, with apparently no approval from his government at all, seized Messina in the name of providing aid. This would not be the last time Carthaginian leaders, far from Carthage, acting on their own initiative, would start a war the rest of the empire had no interest in, and would be well advised to avoid. Hanno would eventually be crucified by the Carthaginian government for his actions at Messana, although the Romans say it was because of the way he left rather than his taking it. I would love to know the real reason. It could have been, if you're going to start a fight with the Romans, you better win it. The Romans responded, and before you knew it, they were at war in Sicily and struggling to learn, very, very fast, how to fight a naval empire as Carthage unleashed piratical raids along the Italian coast. The Carthaginians had seen large armies in Sicily before, and they figured that as long as they maintained control of the sea, they could withdraw behind the walls of their fortress ports and watch the weather, disease, and hunger work their damage on the encamped besiegers, all the while the Carthaginian navy could plunder the supply lines. When the Romans embarked on a naval build-up to counter their control of the sea, that was concerning to Carthage. Which brings us to 260 BCE, and the Lipari Islands just north of Sicily, these days known as the Aeolian Islands. A Roman consul, and when we say consul, think a co-president with a one-year term, Gnaeus Cornelius Scipio, had brought the first 17 ships of the Roman naval build-up down to Messana to screen the transport of troops and supplies. There Scipio was informed that the city of Lipara was ready to change to the Roman side. Control of the islands would make the Roman transport ships much safer, as it was a great staging point for Carthage's raiders. It's possible this was a Carthaginian trick all along. A Carthaginian leader called Boodes arrived at night after the Romans were in harbour and attacked them in the dark by surprise. As always in naval warfare, being caught on the beach is a recipe for complete disaster. All 17 Roman ships were captured, as was the consul Cornelius Scipio. Remember, this is roughly the equivalent of a president or a prime minister today. This is a big disaster. Scipio was eventually released by the Carthaginians, possibly ransomed. The sources aren't clear, but I hope the Carthaginians got at least his weight in gold. For the ignominious defeat and capture, he became known by the cognomen Asina, or female donkey, although it didn't appear to harm him too much, and he'd be elected as consul again in 254 BCE. The contest for control of the seas and the future of the world had begun. Strap in, folks, we've got lots more to cover as we take on every naval battle in history. Smash those like and subscribe buttons, ring that bell, you don't want to get left behind.